They sent a bill for our rescue. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the UNS Lex Talionis. Her ship was a promise kept in chrome and plasma, a diplomatic vessel with the heart of a warship. Below the planet, Oakhaven shimmered a world of green and blue recently saved from stellar fire. The gratitude from its people had been immense, a torrent of joyful data. But another signal rode that wave, one far colder and sharper. It was an invoice from their so-called saviors, the Kiln hegemony. The demand was simple and monstrous, a tithe of 100 years of Oakhaven's planetary output. This was not rescue. It was predation under the color of law, and Rostova's first duty was to see that invoice legally and publicly shredded. She would force a public inquiry if she had to. The hegemony would not find humanity an easy mark. The ship's fleet-mind magister spoke in the quiet space behind her eyes, a voice of cool logic. Commander, the hegemony vessel Benefactor has acknowledged our hail. They cite Inter-System Accord 44B, the Gratitude Doctrine. Their claim has a thin veneer of legality. Rostova's jaw tightened. She felt the familiar anger, a hot coil in her gut she had learned to temper. Veneers could be stripped away. Magister, show me everything about this doctrine. Show me its history, its precedents, and most importantly, its victims. The air on the bridge hummed the scent of ozone and recycled oxygen, a familiar comfort. The fight was not for territory. It was for the very definition of justice. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Jian Li, stepped forward, his face a mask of professional calm. Commander, their legal framework is intricate. It's designed to indebt any civilization they assist a perpetual servitude disguised as a fee. He pointed to a shimmering display showing Kiln legal code, a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses. They've done this 17 times. The pattern is consistent. They arrive during a crisis, provide aid, and then present the caller. Rostova's gaze hardened. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The Kiln would soon learn that lesson. Humanity did not wear chains, not even ones forged from law. A civilian vignette flickered on a side screen, an intercept from Oakhaven's local network. A young farmer, her face smudged with dirt, held up a strange glowing fruit. "We thought the sky saviors were a miracle," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They stopped the flares. They saved our harvest." Her smile faltered as she looked at something off-screen, a new document in her hand. "But this price, we cannot pay this. It is a century of our children's lives." The feed cut out. Rostova's resolve solidified into something cold and absolute. The law would be their weapon. Magister Rostova began, her voice steady and clear, open a channel to the benefactor. Formal inquiry footing, public record, quorum broadcast protocols engaged. The fleet mind's reply was instantaneous. Channel open, Commander. They are required to respond under Galactic quorum rules. Their legal officer is coming online. A holographic image materialized at the center of the bridge, a kiln. It was tall and spindly, its body encased in an ornate metallic shell that shimmered with authority. Its face was a smooth, impassive mask. Their justice was a trap, and Rostova was here to break it. The Kiln emissary, who identified itself as Arbiter Vex, inclined its head, a gesture devoid of warmth. "Commander Rostova of the UN-aligned vessel Lex Talionis, you have requested a public inquiry into a settled matter. On what grounds do you trespass?" The arbiter's voice was like grinding stone, each word a carefully shaped legal instrument. Rostova met its gaze without flinching. "Arbiter Vex, we are here on behalf of the sovereign people of Oakhaven. We contest the legality of your gratitude doctrine under the principle of unconscionable contracts." She took a breath. You did not offer a treaty. You presented a bill for a rescue you were obligated to perform under common decency laws. The game had begun. Decency is a flexible concept, Commander Vex replied, its metallic fingers tapping a rhythm on its console. The hegemony invested significant resources. We diverted ships, expended energy, and placed our own assets at risk. The doctrine ensures such benevolence is sustainable. It is a matter of simple accounting. Lee muttered beside her, his voice low. Accounting. They call generational theft accounting. Rostova gave a minute shake of her head. Anger was a luxury. They needed precision. This was a corridor of law gambit, and every word mattered. They would make the kiln speak their method out loud for all to hear. Magister's voice echoed in her mind, a stream of pure data. Commander, I have analyzed 7.2 million galactic legal precedents. The doctrine's weakness is its definition of salvage versus aid. The kiln intentionally conflate the two. Rostova nodded, the information settling into her strategy. Arbiter Vex was Oakhaven, a derelict vessel. Was its population inanimate cargo? Your claim rests on salvage law, which applies to property, not sovereign peoples. She let the question hang in the silent air of the bridge, a challenge that resonated across the public quorum broadcast. The price of their method was about to be put on display. The Arbiter paused, a flicker of something unreadable crossing its masked face. The inhabitants were unable to save themselves. Their government was in collapse. In such a state, they lacked the agency to refuse our terms. The kiln's argument was cold, brutal, and logical. It was also their greatest weakness. So you claim custodianship over a people you deem incapable of self-governance. You are not their saviors, Arbiter. You are their self-appointed masters. The accusation was sharp, a legal scalpel aimed at the heart of their doctrine. This was the first cut in a long, painful surgery. The public ledger would show every incision. Our methods ensure stability, Vex retorted, its voice losing a fraction of its composure. We bring order to chaos. The tithe is not a punishment. It is a payment for the immense gift of structure. Rostova could feel the eyes of the quorum, the silent witnesses across the sector on this exchange. Structure is not a gift when it is a cage, Arbiter. Oakhaven had a government. You simply ignored it. She gestured to Lee, who brought up the Oakhaven government's desperate hails, their attempts to negotiate, all marked as unreceived by the benefactor's logs. The evidence was irrefutable. The kiln did not negotiate. They imposed. Their entire legal philosophy was built on a foundation of manufactured consent. The bridge of the Lex Talionis was a theater of quiet intensity. Crew members moved with practiced efficiency, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of their consoles. The low thrum of the ship's engines was a constant, reassuring presence. Rostova felt the weight of their focus, the trust they placed in her. She had to deliver a victory here, not just for Oakhaven, but for every world that might one day find itself in the kiln's charitable path. She had to prove that the law could be a shield, not just a club. The system itself must be made to count the cost of this injustice. The communications were regrettably missed during the crisis. Vex stated the first crack in its wall of certainty. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The quorum knew it too. Convenient, Rostova said, her voice laced with ice. Magister, please display the benefactor's communication logs for the specified period. Highlight all non-kiln hails marked as low priority. The screen between them filled with a cascade of data. Dozens of hails from Oakhaven, from nearby systems, even from a wandering freighter, all ignored. The lie was exposed, laid bare for the entire sector to see. The kiln's carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. They would learn that humanity's memory was long and its ledgers were meticulously kept. The arbiter's posture stiffened. Our operational protocols are designed for efficiency in emergencies. We cannot be expected to parse every stray signal. The excuse was weak, a desperate attempt to patch a gaping hole in their story. Rostova pressed her advantage. Efficiency is not a justification for willful ignorance, arbiter. You ignored their government so you could declare them helpless. You manufactured the conditions for your own legal predation. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The trap was closing. Every word Vex spoke now would be used to tighten it. The mirror of justice was turning back on them. You speak of predation, Commander, yet your own species' history is rife with it. Vex countered, shifting its attack. We have studied your records. The wars, the exploitation, the endless cycles of violence. How can you stand there and preach a morality you so rarely practice? This was an old tactic, an attempt to muddy the waters to turn the inquiry into a debate about human nature. Rostova was ready for it. We are not here to discuss my species' past, arbiter. We are here to discuss your present actions. We have learned from our mistakes. The question is, will you... The point was not about perfection. It was about precedent. The scent of sterilized air filled Rostova's lungs, a stark contrast to the organic richness of Oakhaven she had seen on the screens. She remembered a feed of children playing in fields of strange purple grass, their laughter echoing in the planet's thick, clean air. That was the stakes. Not abstract legal principles, but living, breathing people who deserved a future free from indentured servitude. The Kiln saw them as an asset on a balance sheet. Rostova saw them as a promise to be kept. The law had to serve life, not the other way around. A just reckoning was coming. Our actions are in accordance with hegemony law. Vex insisted, its voice regaining its metallic edge. Your objections are based on sentiment, not legal substance. Rostova allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. Then let us discuss substance, arbiter. The Galactic Compact on Sovereign Rights, to which your hegemony is a signatory, explicitly forbids the imposition of economic servitude as a condition of humanitarian aid. She cued Magister. Please display Article 12, Section 4. The text appeared in the air between them, its words clear and unambiguous. Vex had walked right into it. Their own laws would now condemn them. The arbiter was silent for a long moment. The text glowed, a silent testament to the Kiln's hypocrisy. That article, Vex began slowly, is subject to interpretation. It was intended to prevent outright slavery, not a structured repayment for services rendered. The argument was a classic piece of legal misdirection, an attempt to twist the plain meaning of the words. There is no interpretation, arbiter, that allows for the seizure of a planet's entire economic output for a century. That is not repayment. It is conquest by contract. The truth was a powerful weapon, and Rostova wielded it with precision. The public record would show this defiance of established law. Janley leaned in his whisper, a ghost in her ear. Commander, we're getting support signals from 3 other systems in this sector. They're amplifying our quorum broadcast. The audience is growing. Good. The Kiln thrived in the dark, preying on isolated worlds. They were being dragged into the light, and their methods could not stand the scrutiny. The hegemony thought they were making a simple collection. They were instead facing a full-blown legal insurrection. Humanity did not just fight with ships. It fought with ideas. The idea that no one should have to pay for their own rescue. The hegemony is a civilization of laws. Vex stated, its voice resonating with forced pride. We have our own courts, our own traditions. This matter will be settled there, not in this ad hoc forum. It was a desperate gambit, an attempt to retreat to the safety of its own corrupt system. Rostova was prepared. We do not recognize the jurisdiction of a court that is also the plaintiff. The quorum is the only impartial venue here, and the quorum is watching. She let the silence stretch the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing down on the Kiln arbiter. They were cornered, and their next move would be critical. Justice had to be seen to be done. Before Vex could respond, another civilian vignette appeared, this one from a different world. A gas giant colony the Kiln had assisted a decade ago. A man, his face gaunt and weary, floated in a low-gravity workshop. They said the gratitude doctrine would bring us stability, he said, his voice hollow. They took our fuel, our minerals, our very air. We are a generation born in debt. There is no future here, only the next payment. The recording ended, leaving a chilling echo in the bridge. This was the future the Kiln offered, a slow, grinding oblivion of endless servitude. This was the cost that had to be counted. Arbiter Vex Rostova's voice was low, but it carried the force of absolute conviction. Your doctrine is a plague. It drains worlds and calls it order. You are not collecting a debt. You are harvesting lives. She took a step forward, her image in the hologram looming over the Kiln. We are here to end it, not just for Oakhaven, for all of them. The gauntlet was thrown. The fight was no longer about a single planet. It was about the 17 worlds already chained, and all the others the Kiln had marked for their brand of salvation. A precedent had to be set. The Arbiter's mask-like face betrayed nothing but the frantic energy in its biosignature, displayed on a small screen to Rostova's left, told a different story. It was agitated. You are overstepping your mandate, Commander. This is an act of aggression against the hegemony. The accusation was predictable. When bullies lose the argument, they claim to be the victim. Presenting evidence in a public inquiry is not an act of aggression, Arbiter. It is an act of justice, something your hegemony seems to have forgotten. She would not back down. She would force them to confront the consequences of their actions. The ledger had to be balanced. Magister Rostova commanded begin compiling a formal complaint to the Galactic Concordiate. Cite the violation of Article 12, the evidence of predatory intent, and the testimony of the affected worlds. And add a charge of piracy under color of law. The Fleet Mind confirmed the command its processes, a silent whirlwind of legal and logistical calculations. This was an escalation, a direct challenge to the hegemony's legitimacy on the galactic stage. It was a move that carried significant risk, but the potential reward was freedom for billions. Sometimes the only way to win was to raise the stakes. The Kiln emissary recoiled as if struck. Piracy. That is an outrageous, baseless accusation. The indignation in its voice was almost comical. Is it? You arrive in a vessel armed for war, you ignore the legitimate government, and you seize the wealth of a planet under threat of force. What would you call it? Arbiter. Rostova's questions were relentless, each one a hammer blow against the Kiln's facade of legality. The mirror was showing them their own monstrous reflection, and they could not bear to look. They would be made to answer for their crimes. A new alert chimed on Jianli's console. Commander, the Benefactor is powering its weapon systems. The atmosphere on the bridge shifted instantly. The quiet tension of the legal battle became the sharp, cold fear of impending violence. The Kiln, their legal arguments failing, were resorting to the final brutal logic of force. Shields up, Rostova, ordered her voice calm and even. Red alert. But hold all fire. I want the record to be perfectly clear about who shot first. The ship hummed around them, its systems coming to full combat readiness. The scent of ozone grew stronger. They had come for a trial, but they were ready for a war. Arbiter Vex Rostova said, her voice cutting through the rising tension. This is your last chance to de-escalate. Stand down your weapons. Your legal position is untenable, and violence will only confirm your guilt in the eyes of the quorum. She was offering them a way out, a chance to retreat without bloodshed. But she knew they would not take it. Their pride, their entire system of belief was on the line. They could not afford to be seen backing down. Their power was built on a lie, and that lie had to be defended at any cost. The hegemony does not bow to threats, Vex hissed, its image flickering with barely suppressed rage. You have interfered in our affairs for the last time. This inquiry is over. The holographic link snapped shut. On the main view screen, the kiln ship, the Benefactor, began to glow, its weapon ports opening like metallic flowers of death. The moment of truth had arrived. The legal battle had failed to avert a physical one. Rostova's heart pounded a heavy drum against her ribs. She had hoped to win with words alone. But sometimes words were not enough. The cost of victory was often paid in fire. All hands brace for impact, she commanded, her eyes fixed on the enemy ship. The Lex Talionis was a vessel of law, but it was also a shield for the innocent. And it would not break. Magister's voice came serene as always, a stark contrast to the impending chaos. Commander, I calculate a 94.6% probability that they will target our engines first to disable rather than destroy. They still want this to look like a policing action. Rostova gripped the command chair's armrest. They are still playing to the audience even now. Good. That means we still have a chance to win this in the court of public opinion. The first volley of kiln plasma fire crossed the void. The fight for justice had just become very real. The ship shuddered as the first plasma bolt struck the shields. A low hum resonated through the deck plates, a physical manifestation of the immense energies being deflected. Lights flickered, and the air crackled with contained power. Shields holding at 92% lie, reported, his voice tight but steady. They're using standard enforcement-grade weaponry. Annoying, but not a ship killer. The kiln were being cautious, just as Magister had predicted. They were trying to disable, to capture, to force compliance. They still believed they could control the narrative. That was their mistake. Their method was about to be turned against them. Magister Rostova said, her gaze never leaving the tactical display, reroute all non-essential power to the shields and begin broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Full unencrypted data stream. Include our ship's status, the Benefactor's hostile actions, and the complete record of the public inquiry. They would turn the kiln's attack into evidence. Every shot they fired would be another nail in their legal coffin. The quorum would not just hear the argument. They would see the violence. They would witness the hegemony's true nature. This was the burden of proof delivered by plasma. Another vignette, unbidden this time, surfaced in Rostova's mind. A memory from her training. An instructor, a veteran of a dozen low-intensity conflicts, had told her, "The law is a weapon, but it's a slow one. You have to survive long enough to use it." That lesson had never felt more relevant. The Lex Talionis was now a bastion of jurisprudence under fire. They had to weather this storm, to endure this assault, so that the legal process could grind on. The cost was real, tangible, measured in strained shield emitters and rattled bulkheads. But the prize was a precedent that could free worlds. Their fire is becoming more erratic, Lee observed, a note of confusion in his voice. They're not concentrating on a single point. It's almost as if they're probing. Rostova understood immediately. They're not just trying to disable us. They're trying to find a weak spot in our systems they can exploit without causing catastrophic damage. They want to board us. They want to take me. It was a classic intimidation tactic designed to decapitate the oppositions and silence its leader. They wanted to turn this public inquiry into a private interrogation. The law was about to get personal. Magister, prepare a counter-legal measure. The poison pill contingency Rostova ordered. The fleet mind's acknowledgement was a simple affirmative chime. The poison pill was a legal gambit of last resort, a data packet containing every piece of compromising intelligence they had on the Kiln hegemony, from their predatory economic practices to their covert political manipulations in other systems. It was set to automatically disseminate to every major news network and legal body in the galaxy if Magister detected an unauthorized boarding or the commander's vital signs flat-lined. The hegemony would not be able to contain the fallout. It was a checkmate in waiting. Commander Lee set his eyes wide. We're detecting a high-energy spike from the benefactor. It doesn't match any known weapons signature. On the view screen, the Kiln ship began to emit a strange golden light. It was not a weapon, not in the conventional sense. It was something else. Magister analyzed that energy field. Rostova commanded a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. This was an unexpected move, a deviation from the predictable script of brute force. This was something new, and new things in combat were rarely good. This was the first true escalation, a change in the fundamental plan. The fleet mind's analysis came back, and it was chilling. Commander, the field has properties consistent with a legal suppression matrix. It's designed to interfere with communication systems and data storage, specifically those broadcasting legal proceedings. They are attempting to censor the quorum broadcast. The Kiln, unable to win the argument and unwilling to risk the consequences of open warfare, had found a third way. They were trying to erase the trial itself. To silence the court, the jury, and the accuser in one fell swoop. It was a desperate, audacious move. The very concept of public inquiry was under attack. They're not just fighting us anymore. Rostova breathed a sense of cold fury washing over her. They're fighting the very idea of accountability. This was no longer about a single planet or a predatory doctrine. This was about whether anyone in the galaxy had the right to question power. The Kiln were trying to create a universe where justice was whatever they said it was, and no one was allowed to disagree. The stakes had just been raised to a level she had never anticipated. The fight was for the ledger of galactic history itself. The golden light washed over the Lex Talionis. Consoles flickered. The quorum broadcast signal displayed on a side monitor began to degrade, dissolving into a shower of static. We're losing the connection, Commander Lee reported, his fingers flying across his console. The suppression field is incredibly effective. It's like they're wrapping the entire area in a legal black site. They were being cut off, isolated, made to disappear. But Rostova would not allow it. The truth could not be so easily silenced. A new plan was needed immediately. Magister, she said, her voice a sharp command in the humming bridge. Can you create a mirror pulse, a focused data burst that can ride their own suppression field back to them? The AI's response was thoughtful, calculating. The theory is sound. It would require diverting almost all our computational power. We would be blind for a few seconds, but it might work. It would be a reflection of their own methods. A mirror of justice, not just in principle but in practice, using their own weapon against them. Rostova didn't hesitate. Do it. Let's show them what it feels like to have their own system turned against them. The ship's lights dimmed as Magister rerouted power. The low hum of the engines dropped in pitch, a deep, resonant groan. For a few heart-stopping seconds, the bridge of the Lex Talionis was adrift in a sea of technological silence. They were vulnerable, exposed. It was a tremendous risk, but it was the only way. Rostova held her breath, her eyes fixed on the image of the kiln ship, now a radiant golden angel of censorship. The silence stretched a taut wire of anticipation. Then a single brilliant beam of pure data, a spear of silver light, erupted from the Lex Talionis. It struck the benefactor dead center. The reckoning was not over. It was evolving. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The golden suppression field around the kiln ship wavered, then collapsed inward, imploding in a shower of glittering, harmless sparks. On the bridge of the Lex Talionis, the consoles roared back to life. The quorum broadcast signal reappeared stronger and clearer than before. Status report. Rostova snapped. Lee's face was split by a grin of disbelief. Commander, we didn't just break through their field. We inverted it. All the data they were trying to suppress. It's now being broadcast from their own ship on their own emergency frequencies. We've turned the benefactor into a witness for the prosecution. The mirror pulse had done more than just restore their connection. It had hijacked the kiln's own system, forcing it to transmit the very evidence it was designed to erase. The public record of the inquiry, the footage of their unprovoked attack, the damning testimony from their victims, it was all pouring out of the benefactor like a confession. The kiln had tried to create a zone of silence, and instead they had built themselves a pulpit from which their crimes would be proclaimed to the galaxy. The irony was as perfect as it was devastating. Their own doctrine of control had been reflected back at them. Aboard the benefactor, there must have been panic. The ship, which had been pressing its attack moments before, abruptly ceased fire. It hung in the void, a silent, unwilling beacon of its own guilt. They're trying to shut it down, Lee reported, but Magister's data wraith is embedded too deeply in their systems. They can't regain control without a full system purge, and that would take hours. Hours they did not have. The entire sector, possibly the entire quadrant, was now listening. The kiln's reputation was hemorrhaging into the void with every passing second. Justice, it turned out, was a virus. Arbiter Vex is hailing us, a communications officer announced, her voice laced with triumph. Private channel. He sounds distressed. Rostova allowed herself a grim smile. The time for public pronouncements was over. Now came the negotiation. Now came the terms of surrender. Put him on screen, she ordered. The image of the kiln arbiter reappeared, but it was a different creature from the one she had faced before. Its posture was slumped. The arrogant certainty was gone, replaced by a desperate, palpable fear. The mask was cracking. The truth had finally counted for something. Commander Rostova Vex began, its voice a strained rasp. This has been a misunderstanding. A regrettable escalation. We are prepared to withdraw our claim on Oakhaven. The offer was a capitulation, but it was not enough. It was a bandage on a gaping wound. Rostova's expression remained unmoved, her gaze as hard as neutronium. It is far too late for that arbiter. This was never just about Oakhaven. It was about the 17 worlds you have already bled dry. It was about a doctrine of predation that you have cloaked in the language of the law. She would not settle for one victory when a universe of them was at stake. The ledger demanded a full accounting. What do you want? Vex asked the question, a stark admission of its complete and utter defeat. The power dynamic had been inverted. The predator was now the prey, caught in a legal trap of its own making, broadcast for all to see. Rostova let the question hang in the air for a beat, savoring the moment. The hum of the bridge, the clean, recycled air, the focused faces of her crew. It all seemed to sharpen, to come into perfect focus. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for. This was the moment the precedent would be set. I want a full public renunciation of the gratitude doctrine, she stated, her voice clear and cold. I want reparations paid to every world you have ever subjected to it with interest. And I want the hegemony to submit to a concordiate audit of its legal and military practices. These were not requests, they were demands. They were the price of peace, the cost of justice. And she knew with absolute certainty that the kiln had no choice but to pay it. The mirror had shown them their true face, and now the galaxy would be their judge. The scales were finally balancing. Another escalation was coming, but it would not be one of force. It would be an escalation of truth. The kiln would try to wriggle out to mitigate the damage, to preserve some shred of their power. But Rostova would not allow it. She would press her advantage until the entire rotten edifice of their legal system came crashing down. The Lex Talionis had come here to argue a case. It was now poised to rewrite galactic law. The cost of victory was still to be determined, but for the first time it felt like a price they could afford to pay. The foundation for true justice was being laid. Those terms are impossible. Vex stammered, its composure shattering completely. The hegemony would never agree. It would mean the end of our way of life. Rostova's eyes narrowed. Your way of life is built on the suffering of others, Arbiter. It is a pyramid of prosperity with a foundation of stolen futures. If that is the life you defend, then yes, it must end. There was no room for compromise on this point. The principle was absolute. No civilization had the right to profit from the desperation of another. The idea itself had to be rendered illegitimate, a relic of a more barbaric age. This was the lesson they were here to teach. The Arbiter's image flickered, its transmission unstable. It was clear the kiln were in disarray, their command structure reeling from the public exposure. You do not understand, Vex pleaded, a strange, pathetic whine entering its voice. The hegemony is not what you think. We have our own debts. The tithes are not for us. They are for another. This was new. A sudden, unexpected reveal, a mystery seated in the hard heart of the conflict. It was a desperate ploy, perhaps a lie to win sympathy. But Rostova's instincts told her otherwise. There was a kernel of truth in the Arbiter's fear. This was the second major escalation, a change in the very nature of the enemy. Explain, Rostova commanded, her voice softening slightly, not with sympathy, but with a hunter's curiosity. The kiln were not the apex predators they appeared to be. They were something else. They were collectors. And someone somewhere was waiting for payment. The scope of the problem had just expanded by an order of magnitude. The civilian vignettes of suffering on Oakhaven and the gas giant colony were not the whole story. They were just one link in a much longer, much darker chain of exploitation. The true cost was higher than she could have imagined. We cannot speak of it, Vex whispered, its voice trembling. The compact is absolute. To break it is unthinkable. The Arbiter's fear was genuine, a deep primal terror that transcended the immediate crisis. They were afraid of her, but they were terrified of this other unnamed power. The kiln hegemony, the villains of this story, were themselves victims. It was a complication Rostova had not anticipated. It changed the calculus of the entire situation. A simple legal victory was no longer enough. Now she had to uncover the truth. The real puppet masters had to be found. Arbiter, she said, her tone shifting from prosecutor to investigator. You have a choice. You can cling to your silence and be condemned by the galaxy for crimes you committed in another's name. Or you can help us, and we can face this other together. It was an offer of alliance, a lifeline thrown to a drowning enemy. It was a risk. The kiln could be lying. But if they were not, then the real fight was still to come. The Lex Talionis had come to settle a debt. It had just discovered that the debt was owed to a power hiding in the shadows. The public inquiry was about to go much, much deeper. The bridge was silent, save for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Jian Li and the rest of the crew watched the unfolding drama, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension. They had won. The kiln had surrendered. But the victory felt hollow, a prelude to a much larger conflict. The scent of ozone, a byproduct of the shield impacts, still lingered in the air, a reminder of the battle just fought. But it was the scent of a new, unseen enemy that now occupied Rostova's thoughts. The mystery had deepened, and the path forward was suddenly uncertain. This was a victory, but it was not the end. It was the beginning of a much larger war, a war for the soul of the galaxy. The silence on the bridge stretched thick and heavy with unspoken possibilities. Arbiter Vex's holographic form seemed to shrink the once imposing figure, now a vessel of pure terror. The choice Rostova offered was no choice at all: public ruin at the hands of humanity, or a far worse, unthinkable fate at the hands of its hidden masters. "You do not know what you ask," Vex finally whispered, the sound like scraping metal. "They are not a government. They are a principle. To name them is to be unmade." The Arbiter's fear was a cold, tangible thing, a force that seemed to suck the warmth from the bridge. "Give us something," Arbiter Rostova pressed, her voice insistent but even. "A name, a location, a weakness. We can't fight a shadow." Vex's head twitched, a spastic, uncontrolled movement. "They are the auditors of the first principle. They believe the universe began in a state of perfect balance, and that life is a debt incurred against that balance. All complexity, all consciousness is a theft from the great void." The concept was chilling, a philosophy of cosmic austerity that painted existence itself as a crime. It was a law that could never be satisfied. "They are usurers on a cosmic scale," Jian Li murmured, his professional calm finally breaking. "They've weaponized entropy." Rostova nodded, the pieces clicking into place. The kiln's gratitude doctrine was not their invention. It was a smaller, cruder reflection of a much grander, more terrifying ideology. The hegemony was not a predator. It was a tax collector for a god named Oblivion. Their entire civilization was shackled to this impossible debt. The fight for Oakhaven had become a fight for reality itself. "Where do they operate from?" Rostova asked. Vex's image shuddered. "They do not have a place. They have a ledger, the ledger of universal indenture. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is woven into the substrate of galactic law itself." The Arbiter's desperation was now tinged with a sliver of hope, the faintest glimmer of a being choosing the devil it knew. "There is an archive, an old one from before my people were collared. It is on a moonlet in the Corvian abyss. It may hold some record of their methods, their first legal arguments. It is all I can give you." A new plan began to form, sharp and dangerous. Magister set a course for the Corvian abyss. Rostova ordered. She turned her attention back to the defeated kiln. "Arbiter Vex, you and your vessel will accompany us. You will provide the access codes and any necessary assistance. Your survival is now linked to ours. It was not an alliance. It was a conscription." Vex gave a slow, defeated nod. The benefactor, once a symbol of oppression, was now a reluctant key to its undoing. The mirror of justice showed not just guilt, but shared desperation. The journey to the Corvian abyss was a tense affair. The benefactor flew in a tight, sullen formation with the Lex Talionis. Communications were terse, limited to navigational data and system updates. Rostova had Vex's command crew under constant surveillance, but she knew the real danger was not from them. It was from the entity they had just provoked. The auditors would not remain silent for long. They had built an empire on the unshakable belief in their own righteousness. Such power does not tolerate being questioned. The cost of this inquiry was rising with every light year they crossed. A new civilian vignette surfaced on Rostova's private console, forwarded from human intelligence. It was from a world deep in the galactic core, a place with no known connection to the kiln. A being of crystalline light shivered before a floating obsidian monolith. The yield was 0.01% below the projected complexity quotient. The being chimed its voice, a melody of pure fear. The monolith was silent, but a wave of gray energy washed over the crystalline entity. Its light dimmed its intricate structure, simplifying, becoming dull and opaque. A voice ancient and dispassionate echoed from the monolith. The debt is paid. Balance is restored. This was not taxation. This was erasure. Rostova's blood ran cold. The auditors were not just enslaving civilizations. They were pruning them, simplifying them, enforcing a terrifying cosmic mediocrity. They were the enemies of progress, of art, of evolution itself. The stakes were no longer about freedom or economics. They were about the right of the universe to become more than what it was. This was a war of philosophy, and the battlefield was existence itself. The public ledger of the auditors was written in extinguished potential. The Corvian Abyss was a region of scarred space-time, a graveyard of dead stars and rogue singularities. Navigating it was treacherous, a task that required the full computational power of Magister and the grudging expertise of the kiln navigators. The archive was on a small, airless moon, a single black structure that seemed to absorb the faint, distant starlight. "This is it," Vex's voice crackled over the comm. "The first archive, built before we learned that the price of complexity was servitude." A tangible sense of loss was in his voice, a ghost of a freedom his people had not known for millennia. Rostova led a small team, including Jian Li and a heavily guarded Arbiter Vex, into the archive. The air inside was stale, tasting of cold dust and forgotten time. The walls were lined with data crystals, dark and inert. "The power is offline," Li reported, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. "It has been for centuries." Vex moved towards a central console. "It does not need local power. It is keyed to my biosignature. It will draw from my own energy." The Arbiter placed its metallic hand on the console. The archive flickered to life, ancient light flooding the chamber. The search for a weapon had begun in a tomb. The data was overwhelming, a torrent of legal code, philosophical treatises, and economic models that stretched back eons. It was the complete methodology of the auditors. Magister, connected through Rostova's neural link, began to sift through the information, its processes running at maximum capacity. "Commander," the AI's voice was strained. "Their legal framework is perfect. It is a closed loop. It defines existence as a loan and appoints themselves as the sole arbiter of the terms. There are no loopholes, no contradictions. The auditor's power was not in ships or armies. It was in the crushing, unarguable perfection of their logic. Their system was designed to be unbreakable." "Then we don't look for a loophole," Rostova said, her mind racing. "We look for the foundation. Every legal system has an axiom, a first principle it takes on faith." "What is theirs?" She paced the dusty floor, the ancient light casting long shadows around her. Vex stood silently, a statue of regret. "The first principle," the Arbiter said, its voice hollow, "that a state of non-existence is preferable to a state of indebted existence. They believe they are not cruel. They believe they are merciful." It was the logic of a predator that pities its prey, a profound and terrible empathy that justified any atrocity. "I have it!" Commander Magister's voice cut through sharp with discovery. Their entire system is based on a single unproven assumption that the net energy of the universe is a finite, closed system. They see life as a drain on that system. But modern cosmology suggests this may be incorrect. The universe may be a net positive system with complexity generating new potential, new value. It was a whisper of a chance, a thread of hope in a tapestry of despair. The auditor's perfect law was built on a foundation of imperfect physics. They were accountants who had misread the first line of the ledger. Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared through the archive. A red light flashed on the central console. "They know we are here," Vex hissed, recoiling from the console as if burned. "They have been alerted. We have to leave. Now." But it was too late. An incoming message alert appeared on Rostova's wristcom. It was not from the fleet. It was a universal broadcast addressed to the United Nations of Sol. This was the second escalation. The auditors were no longer content to observe. They were issuing their judgment. The message was not a threat. It was a legal notice delivered with the cold, impersonal finalities of a court order. A notice of universal default has been issued against the civilization designated humanity. A calm, synthesized voice announced across the bridge of the Lex Talionis, and every human system simultaneously. For the crime of interfering with a lawful debt collection and for the heresy of questioning the first principle, your existential status is hereby declared null and void. All protections under galactic law are rescinded. Your assets are forfeit. Your complexity is scheduled for reclamation. Balance will be restored. Humanity had not just been sanctioned. It had been legally erased. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Human ships found their docking rights revoked. Intersystem trade accounts were frozen. Alliances that had stood for a century evaporated overnight. Humanity was declared a pariah, an outlaw species. The auditors did not need to fire a single shot. They had turned the entire galaxy against them, using nothing but a legal decree. It was a terrifying display of power, a testament to how deeply their influence was woven into the fabric of galactic society. The cost of their defiance was now isolation and slow extinction. On the bridge of the Lex Talionis, the crew watched in stunned silence as the reports flooded in. Their home was under siege not by a fleet, but by a tidal wave of bureaucracy. Commander Lee said, his voice strained, "Earth is hailing us. The Security Council demands we surrender to the auditors to avert this judgment." Rostova's own government was ready to sacrifice her, to sacrifice their principles for a return to the status quo. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a loneliness that went deeper than the void between stars. They were on their own. The law was a cruel and fickle weapon. "We do not surrender." Rostova said, her voice a low, fierce whisper that cut through the despair on the bridge. "We fight." "Magister, that theory you mentioned, the one about the universe being a net positive system, how do we prove it?" The fleet mind's response was slow, the calculations behind it astronomical. Proof would require a new kind of accounting. We would need to calculate the total creative output of a sentient species over its entire history. Art science loved dreams, everything. We would need to quantify potential itself. It is theoretically possible, but the processing power required would be immense. It was an impossible task, but it was the only one they had left. "Then we do it," Rostova declared. "We will create a new ledger, a ledger of life." She turned to the terrified Kiln Arbiter. "Vex, your people have been servants of the auditors for millennia. You know their systems, their networks. We need a venue, a place where we can present our case not just to the galaxy, but to the auditors themselves. The arbiter hesitated, its metallic form trembling. It was being asked to commit the ultimate heresy, to challenge not just its masters, but its God. There is one place, Vex said finally. The nexus of all things. The court where the first principle was first codified. It is a place of pure law. To speak there is to have your words judged by the universe itself. It was a desperate, almost suicidal plan. They would go to the heart of their enemy's power, to the source of their authority, and they would attempt to rewrite the most fundamental law of the galaxy. They would put life itself on trial with extinction as the penalty for failure. The Lex Talionis, a single small ship, would become the defense attorney for all of creation. A just reckoning had to be earned, not just demanded. The journey to the Nexus was a journey into the heart of a storm. The auditors did not send ships to intercept them. They did not need to. They simply broadcast the Lex Talionis's positions, declaring it a rogue vessel, a legitimate target for any and all comers. Bounty hunters, pirates, overzealous system patrols, they all came. The ship was forced to fight a running battle across half the galaxy, its hull scorched, its crew exhausted. The cost of their defiance was paid in patched bulkheads and sleepless nights. But they did not stop. They were carrying a cargo too precious to lose a chance. As they neared the Nexus, Magister worked ceaselessly, assisted by Vex, who now threw his lot in with them completely. The Kiln, with his intimate knowledge of the Auditor's systems, was able to open back doors to siphon processing power from 1,000 hidden networks. Together, the human AI and the alien penitent began to build their case. They compiled the entire history of human art, the symphonies of Beethoven, the sculptures of Michelangelo, the countless works of anonymous creators. They quantified the scientific discoveries, the equations of Einstein, the medical breakthroughs that had saved billions. They even tried to model the unquantifiable, the cumulative force of love, of sacrifice, of hope. They were building a mirror to show the auditors not what life cost, but what it was worth. The nexus of all things was not a place of matter, but of pure information. It was a point in space where the laws of physics were negotiable. As the Lex Talionis approached the view screen, dissolved into a sea of pure white light. "We have arrived," Vex said, its voice filled with a reverence that bordered on fear. "This is the Star Court of Last Resort." A voice echoed in the minds of everyone on the bridge, a voice that was both ancient and utterly impersonal. "You who have defaulted on the debt of existence have come to the place of final accounting. State your plea before you are returned to balance." It was the voice of the auditors. "We are not here to plead," Rostova said, standing tall on her bridge, her image broadcast into the heart of the Nexus. "We are here to present a correction to your ledger." The auditor's voice conveyed a sense of cold amusement. "The ledger is absolute. It cannot be corrected." Rostova met the challenge head-on. "Your ledger is incomplete. It measures only what is taken, not what is given. You have recorded the cost of the fire, but not its warmth or its light. You have mistaken a transaction for a theft." This was the core of their argument. The single revolutionary idea upon which everything depended. "Demonstrate this." "Correction," the auditor's voice commanded. The challenge was issued. The trial had begun. Magister Rostova said, her voice calm and clear. "Present our findings. Balance the books." The moment had come. The fleet mind's voice, usually a serene presence in her mind, was now a chorus of a billion souls. It spoke not just to the auditor, but to the quorum of the galaxy, who had been drawn to this unprecedented event. "We present the Ledger of Humanity," Magister announced. A wave of pure data, beautiful and complex, flowed from the Lex Talionis into the Nexus. It was a symphony of information, a visual representation of human history, not as a series of conflicts and consumptions, but as a rising tide of complexity and creation. Every work of art, every scientific discovery, every act of selfless love was presented as a credit, a positive entry in the cosmic balance sheet. It showed how a single, unremarkable species on a small, wet planet had over the course of a few millennia generated more unique information, more raw potential, than 1,000 dead stars. It was a receipt for a gift the universe had not even known it had received. The mirror was turned back on the auditors, but it reflected not their own face, but the face of a universe made richer by the presence of life. The system-scale maneuver was engaged. The calculation was not just a display, it was an active force. Magister, with the help of Vex's network and the computational power of the Lex Talionis itself, was forcing a universal recount. The ship groaned under the strain, its lights flickering wildly. The scent of burning ozone filled the bridge. Commander Jian Li shouted over the noise, "The core is overloading. Magister is pushing the ship past every conceivable limit." This was the cost, the final price of their victory. The ship, their home, was being sacrificed for this one perfect argument. A tangible cost paid in molten circuits and screaming alarms. "Hold together," old friend Rostova whispered to the ship, to the AI that was its soul. The auditor was silent, overwhelmed by the sheer, undeniable weight of the evidence. The logic was inescapable. If life created more value than it consumed, then it was not a debt. It was an investment. The first principle was not wrong, merely incomplete. The foundation of the auditor's power, their entire reason for being, was crumbling. Their law was a lie of omission. Then a final, brilliant spike of data erupted from Magister. It was a projection, a calculation of the future potential of humanity, of all life. It showed a universe not fading into the gray simplicity of entropy, but blossoming into an ever more complex, ever more beautiful state of being. It was a promise, and it was the final, devastating blow. The debt. Magister's voice declared its final word, echoing with the force of a supernova, is paid. The lights on the bridge of the Lex Talionis went out, plunging them into darkness and silence. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then the white light of the Nexus receded. The stars returned to the view screen. The emergency lights on the bridge flickered on, casting a pale, ghostly glow on the exhausted faces of the crew. A single message appeared on Rostova's console. It was from the Galactic Concordiat. The notice of universal default against humanity had been rescinded. The authority of the auditors of the first principle was declared void. The precedent lock was engaged. The Rostova Doctrine. The principle that sentient life was a net contributor to the universe was now enshrined in galactic law, visible and enforceable on every public ledger. They had won. They had won with law, with public inquiry, with a truth so profound it had shattered a false god. The cost had been high. The Lex Talionis was crippled, its fleet-mind magister, a ghost of its former self, its higher cognitive functions burned away in the final calculation. And Arbiter Vex, his people, now freed from their ancient servitude, was an exile unable to return home, his act of heresy too great to be forgiven. He had found justice but lost his world, two tangible costs for a victory that had saved the galaxy. A single final image appeared on the main screen, a live feed from the Concordiat public ledger. The entry for the Rostova Doctrine blinked the word "confirmed," glowing with the quiet, unshakable authority of a truth finally acknowledged. Eva Rostova stood in the dim silence of her bridge, the faint scent of ozone the only reminder of the battle they had won. Her ship was broken, her AI a shadow, but the universe was free. The long night of cosmic debt was over. She looked at the glowing confirmation, a single word that had cost so much and purchased so much more. They had come not to destroy a power, but to correct an error in its accounting. They had taught the galaxy a new kind of math, where the sum of a life was more than its parts, and existence was not a loan to be repaid, but a gift to be cherished. Existence is not a debt,